Will Kirk Cousins ignite this Falcons passing offense? The biggest free agent quarterback signing of the offseason was Kirk Cousins going to the Atlanta Falcons, and then they weirdly decided to go draft Michael Penix Jr. in the first round. For our purposes here with fantasy football, Michael Penix not really going to matter, I think, in 2024, and if he does, things went way haywire for the Atlanta Falcons. So when I did my projections, I only projected Kirk Cousins as the only quarterback to play for the Falcons this season. That's kind of the way I think it will go, or at least I hope it goes, quite frankly, because, again, if Penix plays, then that means really bad things for Kirk Cousins. Now, this offense has been incredibly inept at quarterback ever since Matt Ryan, and even, quite frankly, the final year of Matt Ryan wasn't quite so great. But Kirk Cousins comes in. You've got Drake London. You've got Kyle Pitts. You've got Darnell Mooney. You've got Bijan Robinson. Why in the world did I just put Darnell Mooney in front of Bijan Robinson? But you even have Rondale Moore, right, in this offense. So what do I think from this offense? Well, it's really, really interesting to try to put together a projection here. I mentioned in the video where I made my projections and kind of how my process works that a lot of it does go off of historical data for the individual players. It also matters for the teams as well. Now, it's a new coaching staff in Atlanta, right? Arthur Smith is gone. But a lot of these players all around Kirk Cousins, that's all they've ever known. That's all that their historical data says is an Arthur Smith projection. So for Kirk Cousins, who comes from an incredibly pass-happy offense, how in the world do I come up with numbers that kind of meld a Kirk Cousins Minnesota offense and an Atlanta Arthur Smith offense? It's a really tough task. I end up kind of meeting in the middle on a lot of things here. I don't think they're just going to throw the ball 40 times a game the way that Minnesota did with Kirk Cousins. I also don't think they're going to throw the ball 24 times the way that Atlanta would want to back with Arthur Smith. So it kind of ends up being right there in the middle. I ended up with 32 pass attempts per game out of Kirk Cousins. So let's give you the season totals here for Kirk. That's 3,971 yards out of Kirk Cousins, 24 touchdowns, which is actually kind of low for what he's been the last few years. But again, that's partly offset because of a Bijan Robinson factor that didn't really exist in Minnesota beforehand for him. Only 8 interceptions out of Kirk Cousins. He's pretty good at keeping that number pretty low for him. And so how would those numbers actually stack up to his past? Well, they're not as good as what they've been the last couple of years in Minnesota. But again, Minnesota was probably the most pass-happy offense in the NFL in recent memory, right? They threw the ball a ton over the last couple of years, and you had great reason to. You had an aged or no longer on the team Dalvin Cook as of last season. You had Justin Jefferson, who was an absolute megastar wide receiver. You had a coach who came from a background of being pass heavy. So it made a lot of sense as where all these things come together. I think there is a world where that is what happens for Kirk Cousins. I also think there's this world too where it's not quite so wide open for him. You're still seeing Tyler Algier involved. You're still seeing Bijan Robinson be a workhorse. And I think that all kind of comes together and says not totally great things for Kirk Cousins' fantasy value, because also he doesn't run it all. So he's not taking any of those points in that regard. It all has to come through the air for him. And it's just really, really hard to trust quarterbacks like that. We see this all the time with quarterbacks. Think about Justin Herbert, a guy who's a really, really good NFL quarterback. But for fantasy purposes, we've seen him kind of ebb and flow because of the touchdowns. And that's really what's going to make or break Kirk Cousins. Does he cross 28, 29, 30 touchdowns, or does he not quite make it there? That's going to be where we end up knowing what the truth is about Kirk Cousins for 2024. Now, as for rankings for Kirk Cousins, I've got him down at QB 19. I'm kind of lower on him than consensus. I think I'm actually lowest of all the sites I've kind of polled to look at for this. Fantasy Pros consensus has him at 17, ESPN 15, and CBS also at 17. So I'm a little bit lower on Kirk Cousins. I don't love that though. I just look at him and I don't quite see the upside I see out of some of the quarterbacks right there I have in front of him. A guy like a Jared Goff, a guy like a Trevor Lawrence, even Justin Herbert in this new offense, right? Like these younger guys, a couple of them do incorporate a little bit more rushing than he does. Or I just prefer the weapons a little bit, in the case of like a Tua, right? Or a Brock Purdy. That's why I have those guys ahead of him. And age and injury risk is also, of course, going to be part of that ranking factor. It's a 36-year-old coming off a torn Achilles. How can I not factor that in a little bit, right? So I'm going to go with those other guys at quarterback here. I don't totally love Kirk Cousins. but I do totally love his #1 wide receiver. So check out this video right now to see my thoughts on Drake London.